Hi, everyone. This is Debbie Urbanik, and I'm coming to you from the Hope at Work blog from D. Whitney Consulting. And I'm here today with Kim LaMontagne, who is the author of a book called It Is Okay to Not Be Okay. And she's an international speaker around mental health in the workplace. So Hope at Work is a blog that's created where we can bring together the conversation around mental health at work with employees, with leaders, and with subject matter experts. So Kim, I'm thrilled to have you here with us today. And I thought it'd be great just to get started really quickly with a little bit of your background and how you arrived at this place of becoming a speaker. And then I've got some questions for you around your thoughts around mental health in the workplace.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's great to be here with your audience. My name is Kim LaMontagne, and I am a high-performing, high-functioning corporate executive who is almost 11 years sober, but for many years I was performing at a very high level in the workplace, living in shame behind a mask because I had alcohol use disorder, depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. They were persistent. They broke me down internally. They broke my soul. But I always managed to get up every day and put on a mask and be that high performer that individuals looked up to. I did a lot of coaching and mentoring throughout the years as well. No one knew that I was suffering except for myself. And in 2009, I made a decision that changed my life, and I sought treatment from the most kind and non-judgmental nurse practitioner ever, who treated me as a person first and said, we're going to do this together. You have a treatable disease. We're going to get through this together. And it was that day that my life started to change. And within the past, I'd probably say 3 years or so, I've become extremely healthy because recovery has its ups and downs, and there's different levels of it. And the past few years, I've been extremely healthy, and I have been working diligently to advocate about mental health in the workplace. I've done a lot of speaking with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I've also spoken around the globe as well to address this topic. It's an important topic that we all need to speak about. I think many of us, especially in the workplace, feel that fear, shame, and stigma are ramifications of what's going to happen if they reach out and ask for help. So my goal is to work with workplaces, specifically in healthcare, but in all industries, to be able to teach and train leaders how to build and sustain a mentally healthy workplace.
That's fantastic. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the numbers now that kind of lead to this discussion. So we know that the National Alliance on Mental Illness says that about 1 in 5 adults will experience a mental health challenge in a given year. And then I found this great study by the American Heart Association, and it's called Mental Health, a Workforce Crisis. And their CEO roundtables commissioned a study that went out and looked at data around how employees feel about mental health. And the really interesting thing is that if you look at it, 9 out of 10 employees feel that their workplace should support an employee if they have a mental health crisis. But less than half, or right around half of them, feel like they're encouraged to talk about it with their supervisor. So they don't feel that leaders are actually encouraging them to have that conversation. And that's leading us to a place where really about 63% of them say, I'm not going to talk to my boss. If I have a mental health challenge, I'm not going to step forward and talk to my supervisor. So the numbers are not looking good still. And a lot of that is because of stigma. So I wanted to just spend a minute with you on your experience and your thoughts on, as a leadership group, as we look at the leaders out there, and even layering in the fact that we're about to possibly all come back to work after going through a massive national crisis with COVID-19. What do you feel leaders should be doing to try to promote that conversation, to sort of normalize the conversation around mental health at work? What are a couple things that you feel like leaders should start to act on?
Well, I think that leaders are really they're understanding right now that mental health is it's a crisis. It was a crisis before COVID-19, but it's even more of a crisis now. We are full of fear. We are full of isolation. We're separated from family members, trying to keep up with work, with home, with school. We're all suffering right now. So mental health and mental wellness has really come to the forefront, which I think is one of the silver linings of this entire pandemic. And I think that normalizing it is kind of happening organically right now. There's still a lot of work to be done, but the number of individuals that were suffering with mental illness prior to COVID-19 and those who are suffering maybe an acute stage of it right now because they don't know how to deal with what's going on, they're understanding more about, wow, this depression, it's like really real. This is serious stuff. I can't get control of myself. I can't get control of my thoughts, let alone perform in the workplace. So I think it is normalizing a little bit. And the CEO and leaders of organizations, I think, have the moral responsibility to really be the face and the creator of a mentally healthy workplace culture by bringing resources to the workplaces, and the resources that are already established, like maybe an employee assistance program, bring it out from the bottom of the human resources manual and bring it to the forefront and really start to promote those resources to make them available. Addressing, educating the senior and mid-level managers on stigma in the workplace and how it affects the number of people who are willing to come forward. Teaching them about presenteeism. And if you're not familiar with presenteeism, that is about individuals who are coming to work that are not fully functioning because of some outside influences, and they're not showing up as their best self. And it can actually cut productivity by 1/3. So when you think of the size of the organization and you think about the number of people who are now affected by mental illness, really training your leadership team and then having it funnel down throughout the entire organization on how to identify someone who's struggling, how to use person-centered language. Language matters in the workplace, and there's a lot of stigmatizing and discriminatory language around mental health and mental wellness. Really getting a grasp on building that mentally healthy language culture in the workplace and creating safe spaces by offering services and maybe on-site wellness plans and yoga, meditation, weekly check-ins with managers to encourage the conversation about mental health because it's good for the bottom line.
Absolutely. I feel like the whole idea around creating a safe space for people to be able to communicate is so critical. And I think that's where a lot of leaders really struggle, because I think there's been such a growth to becoming a leader where there's this perception of I have to be this strong, dynamic person. I have to be, you know, brave and put myself out there and not have any flaws. And I think the conversation is really changing around creating that honest, authentic vulnerability with your people so that they feel safe to go have a two-way communication with you. Some of the recent things I've been looking at include psychological safety, and a big part of creating psychological safety for an employee is really making them feel, number one, I belong, but at the highest level, it's really having those leaders give employees a sense of, I have your back. You can go out and try new things. You can express things. You can take personal risk because I have your back. And I know, Kim, you've been speaking and some leaders have brought you into their companies. And I'm curious if in your experience have you had any kind of positive experiences that really left a really good impression on you as far as how a leader is handling the mental health conversation?
Well, it's interesting. I'll actually speak to you about an experience that I had with speaking and a speaking engagement. I was a speaker at a healthcare HR conference, which was in Houston, Texas last year. And there were about 150 senior level vice presidents at this conference. And I got up and I spoke about mental health in the workplace, creating a mentally healthy workplace culture, and I shared my story. I always start by sharing my story because it brings the lived experience, the human experience, and the credibility as well that I've been there. I've lived it, I've experienced it, and this is how it feels. And when I went through my entire story, over the course of that 2-day conference, 13 people, I counted them, they came up to me and admitted that they were suffering too. And that I was brave and courageous to stand up there and speak my truth. But they were so happy that I did. So to be able to have a leader who suits up in a coat of armor on a daily basis because they're operating in such a high capacity with so many responsibilities and duties that they cannot be seen as weak. They have to be seen as that strong leader, because what happens if they're weak? Maybe they'll lose a little bit of control. But I think that being vulnerable, and also if you're suffering yourself as a leader, how frequently are you doing a personal health mental check-in? That is, a mental health assessment is something that I've built, and I think it's very important for leaders to be able to take stock in their own mental health or well-being, and not be able to share everything, but to be able to speak from the heart as a CEO or a leader, and speak to that employee population to say, I value you as employees. We are all part of the family. I recognize that mental health and well-being is an important part of the workplace, and I want to help educate and bring resources to you. Whether or not he or she shares her story, personal story in there, that's completely up to them. But by speaking from the heart and really looking at the needs of these employees from the human side, and then if you want to relate it to the numbers, it is absolutely good for the bottom line, because you're going to raise the engagement and the productivity of your employee population just by simply putting resources in place to support them.
Absolutely. It's really getting to the heart of it before it becomes a problem, creating that culture that's a mentally healthy culture where people feel safe to talk about it. So you're not having people that are adding to their stress by trying to hide their condition. As you mentioned, you had had that experience in the past. So really, thank you so much, Kim, because I think as we look now towards that return again, from being quarantine to going back to work, really having leaders that come across strong. You talked about being willing to put themselves out there, to have that dialogue, to be authentic, to share stories if they can. Those are all ways, and make sure managers are conveying those messages right down the ladder, right down to the employee base. Those are all great things that leaders should start to think about as they start making their plans of reboarding the employees or restarting after COVID-19 as well, to make sure that we're creating a mentally healthy workplace. So thank
Yeah.
you so much for coming and for sharing your great thoughts and ideas. And I look forward to having a lot more conversations down the road to keep this dialogue going. I think the more we have conversations, the less stigma is allowed to survive in a workplace.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. And it's been a pleasure to be here today. And I think this is an important topic, and one that we need to continue to discuss, because it's here and we're all having a hard time. And if we can take off the mask and be vulnerable and honest and say, I'm not okay, but you know what? It's all right, because I'm asking you for help, and not be afraid to ask for it. That is what the key is. So I appreciate the conversation.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you.